Hello, awesome Game Master. I received a tips request yesterday, and there's a bit involved in it. So I figured a video would make it easier for me to explain some ideas and to help out the questing Game Master versus a long-winded article. So the central idea here is keeping arcs alive, plot arcs alive. And so the tip request, I'm not going to read it out. You can pause the screen here and read it. But it, in my opinion, boils down, if we unpack it, it boils down to three key points. First, how do we remind players of details of our campaign when we have a long time between sessions and the players don't like to read campaign notes? Two, how can we make how can we make our campaign arc feel cohesive and have continuity when, due to lack of player remembering things, it feels like every session is a one-shot. Hey, I have no recollection of history, so I'm starting brand new. What's the session about today? And the Game Master wants continuity over a long period of time, despite bad memories. Three, players are reading too much into session recaps. So if the Game Master does take the time to do a session recap, the players think every detail is important, and that delays the game, causes too many red herrings, causes frustration for the Game Master. And so having thought about it, I think we could put it all under one umbrella of how do we keep campaign arcs alive, given that there might be lengths of time between sessions, the players don't remember all the details, and the players put false importance on minor details and then chase their tails. Pun intended. So the first question here is clues versus details. Here are some tips on how we can deliver some clues in a way that doesn't trigger the players to think and hinge on everything and overthink things and analyze things and follow too many cul-de-sacs. The first is that we can, to start, be direct. We can literally call out what is important and what isn't. This kind of breaks the fourth wall, and many GMs might not like this approach, but I'm proposing it as a temporary measure. If you have players, for whatever reason, due to lack of experience, or they're just not thinking about the game, what have you, if they are told directly, this is an important detail, take note of it, this is not an important detail, and you do that once, twice, three times, however long it takes, then players will start to learn that you do give information that doesn't require action on their part. It is more atmospheric and descriptive than, what would you call it? Than telling them you should go do this. Proscriptive. Yeah. Two, establish atmosphere. So if you can add more details about tone and atmosphere, pure description, it's sunny outside, it's hot and it's humid, steam rises up from the loam, from the rich jungle earth. Those are obviously not clues for the players to action. Those are purely descriptive details. If you deliver those, then the players start learning that some details are purely for descriptive reasons and the others are, hey, you should take action and follow the quest or the breadcrumb trail or what have you. And this helps immerse the players as a side bonus. So your description skills improve over time as well. And players learn to receive details that aren't necessarily actionable. Third, we can have recurring elements. So we have basically four types of game pieces in our games: people, places, things, and events. So if we bring one of those game pieces back into gameplay, our players will not think, oh, wow, this is a brand new detail, we better act on it right now. And instead they say, oh, it's that merchant again. We've already encountered them. So their guard is down, their antennae are assuaged a little bit, and they're not going to instantly leap to the conclusion that this familiar element is of critical importance. As a bonus, you help the players with continuity and gain more familiarity with your campaign, which will also help with their memory, which is a later point. Finally, it also helps players determine what's important and what's not, because recurring game elements they've already encountered, they kind of have an idea of what it is and have probably interacted with it. So it doesn't feel like a tip-off that something important is happening right now. You can also use props. So if you hand out props as a signal that this is important information, take note, that takes the weight off of other details that you deliver through other methods. It's a bit of a subtle reinforcement. Plus, If players go the opposite direction and start thinking that every detail is not important, well, the props are a way for you to say, yeah, this is actually important. It's a highlight opportunity. And then it also helps your campaign. It helps with their memory, so that's a 2-for-1 win. And it helps put the focus back on the campaign and the campaign arc, because the props are usually clues and relevant things to keep the plot moving along. Bucket details. So if you can separate as an experiment, because everybody is different, so I don't know your players, and one group of players might react differently to this technique than others. But if you purposefully put the important details in one bucket and your atmospheric tone and minor description details in another bucket, and keep those lines clean, then your players will learn that as you're delivering recaps and other encounter descriptions and so on, that part one is the inconsequential details. He's setting up the mood, the atmosphere, and the tone. And then part two is the stuff that we better dial in on and listen to and take note of. And although that is also a little bit fourth wall-y, it can definitely train your players. Not definitely, but it might train your players to listen and understand that your information comes in two different buckets. And then finally, use skill checks. So if we encourage our players to leverage their character sheets to gain information about the game world, about the plot, and also about what's important and what's not, then you have an in-fiction way to tell the players what's important and what's not. So encourage your players to use their character skills. Even if it is, okay, we know this fact already, I would like to make an intelligence check to determine if this is something we should act upon right now, if there's urgency, how important is it? And then you can describe how that character evaluates this piece of information within the context of the campaign. Because think about it, the players can only experience the campaign through their imaginations via what details you share with them and whatever they might have as props and what they read maybe in third-party supplements or whatever their information sources are. But a person in the world who grew up in that world and lives in it day to day will have so much more detail and basically signals to determine what's important and what's urgent and what isn't. So to compensate for that, leverage skill checks as a direct means to evaluate details. Now, once we've figured out our mechanism for delivering clues versus details, how do we help players recall them? That's the next how I would sequence your question. How do we help players who don't like to read recall the details? You can record sessions. It could be audio, it could be visual. You can use Zoom recordings or some kind of recording mechanism, and then players can watch it later. Players who miss sessions can also benefit from this by watching it later. And also you can increase the speed. So if you play a 4-hour game, then it doesn't have to be, it can be recorded and watched in 2 hours if they're comfortable listening or watching at 2 times speed, or at 1.5 speed, it would be 3 hours. Log sessions. So ask players to take notes. If they are taking notes, then they're going to have better recall. Then they also help you, you can leverage those notes to firm up or fill in the gaps of notes that you might have taken during the session. And then also the players can help each other remember because they're taking notes from their limited recollection of things and their characters' points of view. So as a group, then, if all those notes grouped together can be a fantastic record of your campaign. You could also do mini recaps. So you mentioned, not wanting to take a lot of time at the beginning of the session and, delaying things. But if we can turn each session into a 1-paragraph story, then over time, the players have very succinct synopsis of what each session was about as reminders. In addition, like several TV shows do, if you combine and make a new session synopsis, or preview rather, if you make a session preview ahead of time that is relevant to what you think will be relevant to what will happen in the session. So basically you're going to curate all your past session stories and just make a central one with here's where you're at right now and here's what I think is going to happen. Don't forget these details. That will work very well. In addition, we remember facts very poorly, but we remember stories very well. So instead of making bullet lists of facts and details, which we hardly remember anything that we've just read after a short period of time, 10% or so. If we instead turn those into stories, we have a much greater chance of players remembering them. Plus, players, and because our brains are wired for story, it'll be much more enjoyable for players to read your recollections and the synopses. And that makes them more likely to try to read them in the future, because you mentioned that your players don't like to read. But one paragraph story, that's fast and fun. Previews. Email your stories and any other details you think are relevant to the session in very short messages prior to a session. That'll get the old noggins churning away and bringing the campaign details back in from long-term memory back into short-term RAM, so that when they start the session, they'll at least have some prods and triggers to remember what's been going on. And then make player references. So if you're using Campaign Logger, you can add, there's a players section and then a GM only secret section. So put details in the players sections. And then Campaign Logger allows up to 25 players to access your logs. So then you're creating almost like a database or an index of things. And their players can use those as references and look those references up in the game to help their memory. So you don't need to do a total download and a data dump into their brains at the start of every session. You can just hit the highlights and then let your tool help the player self-reference and recall details better in the future. Okay, so if we've got how we deliver clues versus details, and now we have some ideas on how players can remember details better if they're not readers, now how do we turn all of this into continuity? How do we make our campaign arcs feel like there's a long-term story being told that it's interrupted by real-time gaps between sessions? And so how do we make our campaign arcs not feel like Groundhog Day, where every session feels like we're brand new again, nobody has memories? So those previous tips will help. In addition, think in terms of milestones. So if we can create one story one paragraph notes in the form of stories of their active quests, that will help them focus instantly on what their priorities are for the session. We also can create simple stories that about their quests achieved in a different section, so then they can reference that in the future. Oh yeah, that's what happened. That was the result. That's what we did in the past. Also, you might incorporate some downtime, whether you run that in sessions or between sessions, include things like training and crafting, shopping, and whatnot. By doing that, it helps players engage the game in ways that add more context and continuity, especially along a timeline, because our memories kind of scramble time over a period. It helps players then create the kind of the soft tissue between the major events in your campaign. And that will help them remember it more, it'll help them enjoy your campaigns a bit more, and it will help your story arcs have a greater context. So for example, raisins and oatmeal. So the raisins, if you just gave them a box of raisins, it's hard to kind of distinguish between every raisin in the box. I don't know if this metaphor is going to work, but if we have delicious raisin oatmeal, where the oatmeal is the downtime activities and the minor details, and the players being able to kind of experience the simulation of your world and get immersed in your world and its details, then the raisins now start to stick out and become memorable. Hopefully you like raisin oatmeal. And then cliffhangers. So if we leverage cliffhangers such that we stop a session on a very memorable note, then the players are more likely to be pulled into that memory much faster at the beginning of next session. In addition, we can add NPCs to the party, so in the form of what I've listed on the slide there. This helps with party memory because now we have an in-fiction, an in-game way to communicate to the players. Otherwise, it's GM talking to players, and many game masters don't like that. It breaks the fourth wall, and it's not pure role-playing. And I try to steer away from that as well. If I can use an NPC who can remind the characters of what's going on, who can tell stories in the game of what's going on so that the players listen and hear it as players and remember it as players, those are wonderful devices for helping your plot feel continuity, feel like with memory, and feel like there's some kind of story building. Also, if you end the session on a cliffhanger, then we can start with a bang. So then we don't have to front load a session with memory and recollection. Just get them into the action, and then that puts them into the game mode. So a few minutes will tick by. they'll soon start to forget work and school and the conflicts in their life and all their long to-do lists and all the garbage on social media and that stuff. And they start focusing in, and the group, the real world fades away. And now we're in game mode and our minds are in the game. I bet that your players will start remembering more details as the game goes on. So instead of front loading a session with, okay, here's what's happened in the last 42 sessions, bam, we're in the middle of a combat. It's your turn. Go ahead. What do you do? And then as the combat or the action scene or whatever that we've started with that is an emotional kick game plays out, everybody gets into game mode and the short-term RAM fills in with the long-term details. Side plots. So if we can develop character-based goals and motivations, then that's going to hook players in deeper to your campaign and help them remember your campaign more. So what are you more likely to remember? A story that is happening to you, or a story told about somebody somewhere else in kind of third person? You're going to remember and have that emotional kind of memory trigger, those hooks, because it is relevant to you, highly relevant to you. And so the more that you can develop character goals and then tell the stories around those goals, the greater you'll have players remember the details and want to participate and carry on the continuity of those arcs. And as bonus, if you can once in a while have your main campaign arc or arcs touch any individual character's side plot, we'll call them, that will further anchor your main plot arc to what the players remember the most and want to experience the most. It's about me, it's about my character. And so you don't have to then connect them and bind them. It's just, in one encounter, you drop in some story arc stuff that relates to the character arc stuff. And now those things connect momentarily and both get kind of a plot progress point. It's good technique there. And so that is ultimately how some tips on how we can hopefully solve your problem of players having bad memories, maintaining your plot arc continuity over gaps of real time between sessions, and basically engaging your players in your stories. I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.